In 1978, several families living in U.S. military housing started getting sick, with headaches, blurred vision, and uncontrolled tremors, sending them to doctors who couldn't explain what was happening. When the military ran air quality tests inside their homes, they found the answer underneath the houses: an organochlorine pesticide called Chlordane, applied to the soil as a standard termite treatment, was migrating up through the ventilation systems and into the air those families breathed every single day. This video covers what happened next and what regulators allowed to keep happening for another decade after the military already had the answer. The Department of Defense banned Chlordane in military housing in 1980. Civilians didn't get that same protection until 1988. 8 years later, and the sole manufacturer had possessed internal research since 1959, 29 years before the ban, confirming the chemical could cause cancer. Stay until the end. There is a specific legal mechanism still available to homeowners right now that the pest control industry does not advertise: a borate-based pre-construction wood treatment that costs fractions of a dollar per board foot, and a 1993 University of Hawaii study that draws the exact line between where the cheap alternative works and where it doesn't, so you can make an informed decision instead of a $3,000 one. Start with the scale of the problem, because the scale is what makes every other number in this story make sense. Termites cause an estimated $30 billion in damage to crops and man-made structures across the United States every year, affecting more than 600,000 homes annually, and the average homeowner who discovers an active infestation will spend $3,000 on repairs alone before they've paid a single dollar for treatment. Subterranean termites alone account for 95% of that damage figure, while Florida residents absorb an estimated $500 million in termite costs every year, and in New Orleans, one particularly aggressive species called the Formosan subterranean termite costs residents more than $200 annually in treatments and repairs combined. The industry trade group NPMA, the National Pest Management Association, has stated publicly that termites cause more damage to American homes than tornadoes, fires, and earthquakes combined. What nobody talks about alongside those numbers is this: Americans spend $5 billion every single year trying to control termites. Not eliminate them, not solve the underlying problem, but manage it year after year on a contract. That $5 billion figure exists in part because the one chemical that produced long-term results was pulled from the market, and the treatments that replaced it were designed around ongoing intervention rather than a permanent fix. That is the system. Here is how it got built. Chlordane entered commercial production in 1947, not as a single chemical compound, but as a mixture of more than 140 related substances, containing approximately 20% heptachlor, thick and amber-colored with a faint, irritating smell, belonging to the same chlorinated cyclodiene family as DDT. What separated Chlordane from nearly everything that came after it was its persistence, because a single soil application beneath a home could remain effective for decades, with an environmental half-life of 10 to 20 years. One treatment, and the termites were gone. Not managed, not suppressed. Gone. For a homeowner, that was the appeal. For the pest control industry, a one-time solution was a revenue problem. The standard application method involved drenching 1,000 square feet of soil with 100 gallons of the chemical before construction, and the barrier it created proved so durable that tests on U.S. government housing conducted 32 years after the original treatment found Chlordane levels still running 10 to 15 times above the minimal risk levels published by the CDC. Between 1948 and 1988, Chlordane went into the soil beneath approximately 30 million American homes, and every pound of it came from one company. Velsicol Chemical Company, headquartered in Rosemont, Illinois, maintained a Washington, D.C. office at 1015 15th Street NW, and Chlordane accounted for more than two-thirds of the company's annual sales. That single financial fact explains nearly every decision Velsicol made across the following 4 decades. By 1959, the company's own internal research had concluded that Chlordane could cause cancer, and none of that information reached regulators, none of it reached the public, and sales continued without interruption. According to a lawsuit filed by the Washington, D.C. Attorney General in 2002, Velsicol responded to that internal finding by launching a years-long campaign of misinformation and deception designed to protect the revenue those sales generated. That campaign was already running before 1959. Rachel Carson, a marine biologist, published Silent Spring on September 27, 1962, naming Chlordane specifically and citing an incident in which a victim who accidentally spilled a 25% Chlordane solution on their skin died within 40 minutes before help could arrive. Carson quoted FDA chief pharmacologist Dr. Arnold Lehman, who had called Chlordane one of the most toxic of insecticides. Anyone handling it could be poisoned. The book moved more than 2 million copies in its initial release, and before a single copy reached shelves, Velsicol threatened to sue the publisher if it went to print. The publisher printed it anyway. President Kennedy asked the Life Sciences panel of the President's Science Advisory Committee to investigate Carson's claims, and on May 15, 1963, that committee released its report with Kennedy's clear approval. Senator Abraham Ribicoff told Carson directly during the congressional hearings that followed, "You are the lady who started all this." Carson had already been diagnosed with breast cancer while writing the book, and she died in 1964 before she could witness how slowly what she started would actually move. DDT lost its agricultural registration in 1972, but Chlordane kept going. The EPA issued a notice of intent to cancel most of Chlordane's registered uses in 1974, and then held that position for 4 years, while Velsicol and the pest control lobby argued that no economical alternative existed for termite control. That argument bought the industry a full decade of continued sales. Farm applications of Chlordane were banned in 1978, and termite use continued. 1 year before that partial ban in December 1977, a federal grand jury in Chicago returned an 11-count felony indictment against 6 Velsicol executives, charging them with conspiring to defraud the United States and concealing material facts from the EPA, specifically data showing Chlordane's potential to cause cancer in humans. 6 executives, 11 felony counts, a federal conspiracy charge, and the termite exemption kept running. That's when the military started testing the air inside its own housing. Chlordane turned up in approximately 75% of Air Force units tested, and 7% of those units exceeded the maximum safe levels under government guidelines. The Committee on Toxicology, convened by the National Research Council in 1979, released a conclusion that contained no ambiguity. It could not determine a level of exposure to Chlordane below which there would be no biological effect under conditions of prolonged family exposure in military housing. Not a lower safe level. Not a safe level with better ventilation. No safe level at all. The Department of Defense banned Chlordane in military housing in 1980, and civilians kept living in Chlordane-treated homes for 8 more years. All agricultural uses were gone by 1983, but the termite exemption survived another 5 years until the EPA banned all remaining domestic applications in April 1988. Velsicol continued producing Chlordane for international export until 1997, citing economic reasons for eventually stopping nearly 4 decades after its own internal research had confirmed the cancer risk. Today, the chemical can still be legally manufactured inside the United States, but only for sale to foreign buyers, with no domestic use permitted in any form. In 2001, the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants placed Chlordane among what the international scientific community designated the Dirty Dozen, the 12 most dangerous persistent organic pollutants on Earth. By 2016, 21 of Washington, D.C.'s 38 miles of rivers and streams were failing or threatened to fail the water quality standard for Chlordane nearly 3 decades after the last domestic application. When D.C. Attorney General Carl Racine filed suit against Velsicol in 2000, his statement read, "Velsicol made dollar after dollar of profit while poisoning D.C. residents with dangerous chemicals that they knew caused severe health problems, including cancer." The internal report confirming that cancer risk dated to 1959, which put 63 years between the company's knowledge and legal accountability. Now here is what replaced Chlordane and why the replacement looks the way it does. Professional termite treatments today run primarily through 2 chemicals. Fipronil, marketed as Termidor, a phenylpyrazole insecticide, and imidacloprid, sold as Primus, a neonicotinoid compound alongside bait station systems like Centricon, that work by targeting the queen over time, plus fumigation and heat treatment for drywood species. Average professional treatment costs between $1,000 and $3,000, and annual protection plans run $300 to $800 per year, which means the payment never stops. Chlordane was a one-time application. The treatment went into the soil. The house sat on top of it, and the protection lasted for the life of the structure, which is exactly why 30 million homes received it. Whatever Chlordane did to the people living inside those homes, and we have been through exactly what it did, it worked as advertised on termites. The chemicals that replaced it worked differently, requiring ongoing monitoring, scheduled reapplication, and service contracts that generate revenue every 12 months indefinitely. Jay Feldman, executive director of the National Coalition Against the Misuse of Pesticides, identified the regulatory gap that allowed this arrangement to develop. The focus of much of what EPA did in the early 1970s was agricultural pesticides. There was less emphasis on structural pesticides and the whole question of their use inside buildings. Chlordane lived in that gap for 15 years after DDT's agricultural ban, and the alternatives to the current system live in a similar gap today. Two substances appear consistently in the research on low-cost termite control, and neither one operates the way the pest control industry prefers to frame them. Diatomaceous earth is the fossilized remains of microscopic algae, ground down to a fine white powder composed largely of silica, and it kills not through chemical toxicity but through a physical mechanism. The microscopic particles destabilize a termite's exoskeleton and pull moisture from the body until the insect dies of dehydration. Laboratory tests on drywood termites produced 100% mortality after 6 hours of exposure to dry diatomaceous earth, and that number is accurate, but it comes with a caveat that rarely travels alongside it. In 1993, researcher J. Kenneth Grace at the University of Hawaii tested diatomaceous earth specifically against subterranean termites, the species responsible for 95% of U.S. termite damage, and the results were completely different. Over 4 days of laboratory tunneling, the substance failed to prevent termite penetration and caused no significant mortality among subterranean termites moving through treated soil. The reason is contact. Diatomaceous earth requires termites to physically walk through open powder on a dry surface, but subterranean termites build mud tubes and move through enclosed moistened channels where the powder loses its desiccating effect the moment it encounters humidity. Diatomaceous earth works in dry, above-ground environments, attics, drywall cavities, low-humidity interior spaces. It does not function as a soil barrier against foraging subterranean termites, and it cannot reach the queen, which means a colony that avoids lethal contact will simply rebuild. Borax operates on a different mechanism entirely. Borax is a naturally occurring mineral salt, and boric acid is its active derivative, available in supermarkets under the 20 Mule Team label for approximately 54 cents per pound, with pure boric acid running around $4 per pound. These are not fringe products. Boric acid is the active ingredient in EPA-registered professional treatments, including Timbor, Boracare, containing disodium octaburate tetrahydrate, Shellguard, and Jecta Gel, products sold to licensed pest control operators at professional price points. The same compound, different packaging, and a price gap that reflects the market structure more than the chemistry. Boric acid kills termites by disrupting their digestive system, preventing them from metabolizing nutrients, and because termites groom one another and exchange food within the colony, the compound can move through a population rather than requiring individual contact with every insect. The distinction that separates a genuinely effective borate treatment from an ineffective one comes down to penetration. When boric acid is dissolved into a solution and pressure applied to raw lumber before construction, the borate infuses through the wood fiber itself, which means any termite that consumes that wood consumes the compound, and the protection holds for the life of the structure in dry interior conditions. Post-construction application to finished wood surfaces only coats the outermost layer, leaving termites that are already eating from the inside untouched, and boric acid dissolves and migrates when wet, ruling it out entirely as a soil treatment for subterranean species. Pre-construction versus post-construction, that distinction is what most homeowners never hear about, and it's where the real cost advantage lives. Picture a wood frame house under construction somewhere in Central Florida in the mid-2010s. The framing crew finished and gone, raw lumber standing in the heat before the insulation crew arrives. A contractor moves through the structure with a sprayer loaded with Timbor solution, coating every exposed 2x4, every joist, every section of subfloor decking before drywall goes up and the wood disappears behind it. The solution soaks in and dries. The framing closes. A family moves in without signing an annual service contract, without scheduling inspections, without setting up monitoring stations in the yard, because every termite that reaches that framing contacts borate-treated wood it cannot eat without ingesting the compound that kills it. Total treatment cost on an average-sized home, fractions of a dollar per board foot, completed once, before the structure was sealed. That treatment is legal in all 50 states right now. The reason most homeowners never encounter that option is not complicated. Pre-construction borate treatment eliminates the recurring revenue model that the professional pest control industry is built around. A home framed with borate-treated lumber doesn't generate annual inspection fees, doesn't renew a service contract at $300 to $800 per year, and doesn't produce a monitoring station visit every 12 months for the life of the structure. The National Pest Management Association represents the businesses that depend on exactly those revenue streams, and their members' financial interest runs directly against prevention that makes ongoing intervention unnecessary. Feldman put it plainly in 2022. The fact that there continues to be contamination from Chlordane decades after its removal from the market is testament to the abject failure of our federal and state pesticide laws. His statement targeted Chlordane specifically, but the structural pattern it describes applies just as directly to what replaced it. Regulatory frameworks shaped by the industries operating within them, pointed toward ongoing intervention rather than permanent solutions. Velsicol's 1959 Internal Cancer Report, referenced in the EPA's IRIS database, the 8-year gap between military protection and civilian protection. Those are not separate failures. They are the same failure, documented across different decades with different names attached. Now for the homeowner who decided to run the numbers himself. The post-construction DIY borate approach available to people in existing homes involves drilling small-diameter holes through drywall or baseboards into wall cavities, blowing boric acid powder into each stud bay, and then patching and repainting. One homeowner who documented this process online had received a professional fumigation quote of $4,300 for whole structure dry wood termite treatment, and instead of accepting it, he drilled into each wall bay, blew in the boric acid, patched every hole, and repainted. His total material cost came in under $200, and he reported no recurrence over the period he tracked. The honest caveat belongs in the same sentence as the number. Long-term efficacy of post-construction borate application for whole colony elimination has not been confirmed by peer-reviewed research. Boric acid coats surfaces rather than infusing wood fiber the way pre-construction pressure treatment does, which means a colony eating deep inside a beam may never contact the compound. What the $4,300 versus $200 gap actually demonstrates is not a guaranteed DIY solution, but evidence that professional fumigation pricing reflects the full-service contract model rather than the minimum effective cost of the intervention itself. That gap between what works and what gets sold is where this entire story lives. Pre-construction borate treatment is written into building codes in several high termite states, and Florida, where termite costs run $500 million per year, specifically recognizes pressure-applied borate treatment of framing lumber as a compliant alternative to soil chemical barrier systems under its building code. A home builder in Florida can choose borate pre-treatment, meet code requirements, and never purchase an annual service contract. That provision is in the code, it requires no legal interpretation to find, and the pest control lobby has not been able to remove it because the underlying products carry EPA registration and an established research record. What the industry has managed instead is to keep those products out of the conversation at the point of sale, absent from contractor recommendations, absent from realtor disclosures, so that most homeowners encounter the $1,000 to $3,000 quote before they ever hear the words Tim-Bor or Boracare. The 1993 J. Kenneth Gray study from the University of Hawaii is publicly available. The EPA registration files for borate products are public record. The Florida Building Code is online. None of this information is classified or hidden. It simply doesn't get repeated by the people who profit from the alternative. Go back to 1980, the year the Air Force banned Chlordane from base housing after finding it present in approximately 75% of tested units, with 7% of those units running above maximum safe levels. And after the National Research Council's Committee on Toxicology concluded it could find no biologically safe level of Chlordane exposure for families living in treated homes. Civilian homes were still being treated during those years. 8 more years of soil drenching, vapor migration, and chemical accumulation in the air inside American houses, while the company doing it had possessed its own cancer research since 1959, while 6 of its executives had been federally indicted in 1977, and while the EPA had carved out a termite exemption specifically because the pest control industry argued no economical alternative existed. There were alternatives. There were multiple alternatives. What was missing was a financial incentive for the people with regulatory influence to move those alternatives forward. When the EPA banned Chlordane in 1988, it didn't replace a bad solution with a one-time fix. It replaced one chemical dependency with a recurring service model, and the $5 billion annual market that resulted was not an accident of chemistry, but a product of the industry structure that filled the regulatory vacuum. Chlordane's ban was correct and necessary. A chemical that caused cancer, accumulated in breast milk, crossed the placenta, contaminated water systems, and earned international classification among the 12 most dangerous persistent organic pollutants on the planet, deserved to be gone. What followed it, though, was a choice. A replacement system built around intervention instead of prevention, service contracts instead of structural solutions, and keeping the homeowner paying indefinitely rather than solving the problem once. Here's what you can do based on where you live right now. Anyone building a new home or addition anywhere in the United States can request borate pre-construction treatment of framing lumber using EPA-registered products like Tim-Bor, Boracare, or ShellGuard, at a cost of fractions of $1 per board foot, with the protection built permanently into the structure. If your contractor doesn't know what those products are, find one who does. If you're in Florida, the relevant provision sits in the Florida Building Code's Pest Control section, and borate pre-treatment is listed as a recognized compliant alternative to soil chemical barrier systems. No lawyer required to find it. If you're in an existing home facing a drywood termite problem in attics or dry interior spaces, diatomaceous earth has a documented preventive use case in low humidity environments where termites haven't yet established, but it is not a substitute for professional assessment of an active infestation. If your problem is subterranean termites in an existing structure, the honest answer is that post-construction boric acid application has a limited evidence base for colony elimination. The 1993 GRACE study is the starting point for understanding why, and the professional options for subterranean infestations in existing structures are more limited than the pre-construction window provides. Velsicol Chemical Company confirmed in its own laboratory that Chlordane caused cancer in 1959, kept that information from the public and from regulators, had 6 executives federally indicted in 1977, watched the military ban the chemical from base housing in 1980, continued selling it to civilian homebuilders until 1988, and left contamination in Washington, D.C.'s waterways that still exceeded safety standards in 2016. The system that replaced it generates $5 billion in recurring annual revenue. That's not coincidence. That's architecture. The next video on this channel follows a different chemical through the same pattern. Widely deployed, industry defended for decades, eventually banned, alongside the alternative that existed the entire time but never got promoted because it didn't need to be purchased twice.